Yo, 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 and welcome to the reassembling. I sure hope people can hear me right now. Let me know as you're coming in if you can hear the audio. I'm kind of skeptical on how it is today, but anyway, welcome to the reassembling. This is a Christian YouTube channel where we deconstruct our doubts and reassemble our faith. If this is your first time visiting our channel and you find what we do beneficial, please consider giving us a follow. You can find us on TikTok. I was going to say not TikTok, but TikTok is back up and running. Twitter, Clapper. You can find me at jesse.walsh.4090 on Instagram, as well as Jesse Walsh on Facebook. So I'm following up on some great lives today. Shout out to Reginald Wells for being on Street Apologists with Vocab Malone. And Brother Jim Green had a wonderful podcast earlier today with Maurice Price from the Prices. Never heard of them. Go check them out. They go against the Colts and the lost of the world, if you will. Let me fix my camera here. I'm going to bring myself in just a tad. So let me know if you can hear me. So for tonight, we're going to be going over. I can't pull up the thumbnail. And if you've noticed, yes, we are on the peasant plan for a couple more days. We will be back on the premium plan where we have all these features. We can show the thumbnail, all that fun stuff. So we're going to be doing From Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph Windsor. We're going to do a kind of like a review. We're going to fact check some assertions in this book. Why? Well, I believe many in the Hebrew Israelite community, they see this as serious scholarship, and it just simply isn't. We're going to explain why this book is pseudo-scholarship, and we're going to explore the methodologies of his work. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. I have a lot to go over, so I got to warn you, there is some reading because, hey, it's a book review, so there will be some reading going on. So let's show our slides, if you will. I made a slide on this. And hopefully this is beneficial to people out there who are intrigued about this book, want to know about this book, and see what's actually going on in this book. So, Rudolph Windsor. Who is Rudolph Windsor? For starters, Rudolph R. Windsor, he born in 1935 in New Jersey. He's a prominent historian, author, and speaker recognized for his work on African and Jewish historical connections. His most notable publications include From Babylon to Timbuktu, which we're going to talk about, and his other works, The Valley of the Dry Bones and Judea Trembles Under Rome. These works highlight historical and cultural intersections, particularly focusing on the heritage of African-descended peoples in relation to Judaism. Windsor's academic journey began with his studies in psychology and political science at a community college in Philadelphia. He later pursued Hebraic studies at Gratz College, earning a Bachelor's of Hebrew Literature degree in 1978. Furthering his expertise, he also studied Middle Eastern studies at Temple University, equipping him with a broad understanding of historical and cultural narratives. Dedicated to historical education, Windsor has devoted his career to shedding light on the often overlooked heritage of African-descended communities. His writings are celebrated for their accessibility, presenting a complex historical themes in a way that resonates with diverse audiences. Well, it really only resonates with a certain audience. Beyond his books, Windsor has traveled extensively, sharing his insights through lectures in the United States, the Middle East, Central America, and Africa. His media presence has included radio and television appearances where he has engaged audiences in discussions about history and identity. I've noticed I don't have any background. I want to get some background going. Oh, can't do it. We'll just do the free one. There, we're purple. Give us some color. What else? What else about him? Throughout his life, Windsor lived in Philadelphia where he raised his family, including 4 sons and a daughter. Later, he moved to a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. His commitment to service extends beyond his academic pursuits. For instance, he participated in humanitarian efforts in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. Praise God for that. He's assisting with recovery and rebuilding initiatives. His work reflects a deep dedication to empowering the communities through education and historical awareness. So that's who he is. What are the peer-reviewed opinions on Windsor's methodology? Well, basically, they're not really, they're both directly and indirectly kind of a thing. I mean, there's a lot of people that have not touched on touch on the particular work of this book, but there are some overlapping understandings. So we'll go to, now bear with me, I have a lot of slides here. So we're looking at some peer-reviewed people who are kind of in the same realm as him. And we will go here. So you know what, let's remove this. Let's cut that one out. I don't know why that's there. The scholarly consensus and criticism of certain aspects within the scholarly realm. For instance, we have Dr. Jacob Dorman. Let me see, Dr. Jacob Dorman. I'll actually go right here. God, shout out to Stevie Rankins. Thanks for checking me out, bud. So, yeah, he is a Dr. Jacob Dorman. He's a scholar of African American history and religion. He has critiqued some of the ideas linked to the movements like Black Hebrew Israelism, which Windsor's book supports. His work, Chosen People. I think I've seen numerous people talk about this book. The book is called The Chosen People, The Rise of American Black Israelite Religions, indirectly addresses related claims. Dr. Yosef, I don't have him on there. I have Michael Birkin. He's a political scientist and scholar of conspiracy theories and pseudo-history. Barkin has addressed how certain books, including those like Windsor's, can blur historical lines, though he doesn't mention Windsor specifically. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, he is a specialist in Semitic and Ethiopian studies. He has often emphasized the importance of rigorous historical research, indirectly critiquing less substantiated Afrocentric claims. There's also Dr. Tudor Parfit. He is known for his work on the African Jewish diaspora. Parfit critiques claims that lack archaeological or textual evidence, often related to Windsor's actions. So, how do we find direct critiques? How do we define the direct critiques? Obviously, it's the searching for the peer-reviewed articles. We look for books. We look for academic databases, even papers critiquing related works. You know, sometimes that's the best we can do. We like to review historians, biblical scholars, commentaries. We look at people who understand the history of African Jews, and then they would see we can kind of take the counterfeit with the real source, if you will. But we're going to demonstrate that through this because this has been a long-awaited work. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. So what are the critiques of his book? There are some critiques of his book as we go to the next slide here. And these are the key assertions of this work. Stevie Rankins, am I coming in okay? Is my audio okay? Is it not overpowering? Is it too low? Just let me know. Key assertions in this book. Where am I at here? Where am I at? Right here. Bear with me. This is why I need a producer behind me. We have it. So let's look at what's going on here. No, yeah, here it is. There we go. That's the one I needed. First key assertion we're looking at is going to be the key arguments. So our key arguments and historical flaws, the African Hebrews as Israelites. So that's the basic assertion, right? Windsor's central thesis is that African Americans are the true descendants of the biblical Israelites. He claims that these Hebrews fled from Palestine to Africa during various historical periods, eventually forming significant populations in West Africa before the transatlantic slave trade. But, the flaw is that the claim that African Hebrews are the true Israelites lacks substantial archaeological and genetic evidence. Historians and archaeologists have extensively studied the ancient Israelite populations, and the majority of genetic studies trace modern Jewish populations to the Middle Eastern regions, not Africa. And throughout this, I'm going to run out of time if I have to show every single source, but I will cite the source verbally. Sometimes I'm able to put the source up there because a lot of people say, "Oh, you're not showing it. You're just going by what you're saying." No, I'm not. This is going to be proof. You look at the genome-wide structure of the Jewish people, Bahar DM et al. In 2010, he does a comprehensive genetic analysis of Jewish populations, And he found that Jewish communities from different parts of the world, including Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, share a common Middle Eastern ancestry, which kind of undermines Windsor's assertion. He has the Exodus. Another assertion in this book is the Exodus and migration theory. So Windsor posits that significant migrants of Hebrews into Africa occurred during the Assyrian and Babylonian exiles. Later, during the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. Okay. The flaw is that the historical records and archaeological findings do not support large-scale migrations into sub-Saharan Africa. The Assyrian and Babylonian exiles led to the dispersal of Israelites primarily within the Middle East and parts of Asia Minor. So look for such works as The Bible Unearthed, 2001 by Simon and Schuster. They go through basically the biblical narratives of mass exoduses and conquests through the Exodus story. You know, it kind of undermines the assertion of Windsor as well. It's also, he looks for Jewish presence in West Africa. So Windsor asserts that Jewish communities established themselves in West Africa long before the transatlantic slave trade, implying a substantial Israelite presence in regions like Mali, Ghana, and Songhai. But the presence of Jewish communities in West Africa prior to the 16th century is not supported by historical records. It's just not. Well, there are Jewish traders and travelers in North Africa, and some reports of small communities. There is no evidence of a significant Israelite migration or settlement in sub-Saharan West Africa. The Cambridge History of Africa, Volume 3, 1977, edited by Roland Oliver and J.D. Fage, detail the history of West Africa and does not corroborate Windsor's claims of substantial Jewish presence in the region before the colonial period. So there's that. He also asserts the Hebrewisms of West Africa. So Windsor highlights cultural and linguistic similarities between West African traditions and Hebrew customs as evidence of Israelite descendants. But the cultural and linguistic parallels can result from a variety of factors, including trade, migration, and the diffusion of ideas, rather than direct descent. So similarities between cultures do not necessarily indicate a shared ancestry. A great work on that would be Africa and Africans in the Making of the Atlantic World by John Thornton, 1998. I think it's a rewrite of that. It's from, he lived from it covers the time period of 1400 to 1800 and explores how cultural exchanges between Africa and other regions influence traditions, demonstrating that similarities do not imply direct lineages. So Thornton, J.K. Thornton. The misrepresentation of historical texts. Windsor often interprets historical texts and biblical passages in ways that align with his thesis, sometimes taking them out of context. And we're going to show you how he does that. Academic standards require the contextual and critical analysis of texts. And all our friends online that we love so dearly to come to the gospel of Jesus Christ don't seem to understand this very, very common fact. Many of Windsor's interpretations have been challenged by biblical scholars who argue that he misreads or selectively uses text to support his arguments. Look at William G. Dever, his title, Who Were the Early Israelites and Where Did They Come From?, which provides a critical examination of Israelites' origins based on archaeological and textual evidence contrasting with Windsor's interpretation. Excuse me. Then there's the racial biases. We have a lot of racial biases going on. Windsor's narrative often portrays white people in a negative light, attributing many of the world's historical and contemporary problems to them. This bias is evident in several parts of his book, where he suggests that white people have historically oppressed non-white populations and are inherently deceitful and violent. You hear that going on a lot. Windsor writes in page 23 of this, Babylon Timbuktu, he writes, the white race has been the most powerful and oppressive race in history. He also states, quote, the European Jews were the persecutors, not the true descendants of the Israelites, on page 45. But scientific and historical refutations of Windsor's bias clearly demonstrate the race and human behavior. The notion that any race is inherently deceitful, violent, or oppressive is just scientifically baseless. Modern genetics and anthropology have shown that race is a social construct with no biological basis for difference in behavior or morality. So if you look at the genetic studies, human genetic diversity is greater within so-called racial groups than between them. A seminal study by Richard Lewontin in 1972 showed that 85% of genetic variations occur within populations, not between them. In his check out the evolutionary biology of the appointment of human diversity in his work, 1972, you can find that those definitions on page 381 to 398. Anthropology and race, the reality of human differences, Vincent Sarich and Frank Maile explain that racial categories are social constructs and do not determine individual behavior or societal roles. That is from 2004, Race, the Reality of Human Differences. Also, he is looking at anti-Semitism. So we see a lot of anti-Semitism here. Windsor's assertion that European Jews are not true descendants of Israelites and were instead persecutors themselves is historically inaccurate and reflects anti-Semitic bias. Get something to drink. As previously mentioned, comprehensive genetic studies have shown that Jewish populations share common Middle Eastern ancestry. It really just debunks the idea that European Jews are not linked, or that they're not linked to the ancient Israelites. Again, that's Behar DM, Bahar DM, in his work, The Genome-Wide Structure of the Jewish People, from page 238 to 242. So I'm glad maybe this might be better on the replay so you guys can check these sources. I might cut them out, put them on as TikTok, short little clips so people can actually check the source. I might even caption it because I'm not going to have time to share all the resources. That's why I'm just kind of going through it. So, yeah, one of the many reasons I believe they love this book, it's only been around since the 70s, I believe. It's very interesting work, and his methodology is very interesting too. We're going to get into it. So that's how is I guess the question is, how is this book to its adherents? How they're receiving this? We're going to go into some videos. Let's go into some videos about kind of the people who are eating this stuff up, and the way they put this in such admiration. It's just like it's really a serious work study on the subject, and it just really isn't, So let's show the screen here. Whoops. I already had the screen shared. Forgive me. Share. I believe it's this guy. So from Babylon to Timbuktu, the beginning of civilization in Islam. This is by Fan Mail News, and he kind of really speaks highly of it.
All right, welcome to another episode of Fan Mail TV Online. Today we got another book for you. It's called Babylon to Timbuktu. The last book was 12 Tribes Culture, Meditation Precepts. You got to get that book. That's a must-have. That's a very good book for learning the Bible very quickly. If you want to get all your precepts together, get that book. That's a good book. This is called Babylon to Timbuktu. This book is going to help you when you want to learn about the Renaissance. You want to learn about the origin of the white race. You want to learn about the origin of man, period. Now, the Bible is the most important book. Let me get that out the way. That's the most important book. That's the best book to go to. But these books confirm that. That's why we read these books. You want to know how Islam started? A lot of people into Islam right now. All you got to do is read Babylon and Timbuktu. You're going to see who started Islam. You're going to find out that was an Arab guy. You're going to find out that Arab started Islam. So why would our people who don't have a relationship with Arabs today follow under somebody who started religion who was an Arab? Why would you even do that? Who came 600 years after Jesus Christ? I might add. So stuff like that, you can find that in Babylon and Timbuktu. You're gonna find out the original names of everybody. Prime example, it's African people in today's time, but they was in the Bible. African people, or who you call Africans, was in the Bible. They was there, but the word African ain't in the Bible. So what was their name? What did you call them? Right here. It's right here. Babylon and Timbuktu. This is a very good book. This is another must have. Matter of fact, I need to get another one of these. I need to have two of these just in case, because I don't even want one of them to be touched. This is a very good book. I'm going to leave the link in the description. Remember, just like every other book, I'm going to leave the link in the description where you can get this book. Take it right to Amazon. Shalom.
And when we were growing up, actually, we also thought that we were African. But the Africans are actually a different bloodline from us. They are Hamitic and descend from...
Sorry, I was muted that whole time. But that last video, yeah, it's very interesting how they hold it in such high regard. You know, it's very interesting. When actually going into the book, check. You think people would want to go behind someone's work to see? I mean, just to be rational, right? I don't know. I guess that's the problem with Hebrew Israelism. It really doesn't need to be fact checked. It just needs to feel right. And they always come at the church and say, "Well, you guys just do what feels right. You don't follow any of the laws, yada yada." So you've heard that argument. Let's continue.
Ham, and we are Shemitic and descend from Shem. So you've got two dark-skinned nations, but two different bloodlines.
Absolutely. And the brothers online, the Israelite brothers, are doing a great job at really bringing out this truth.
Oh, by the way, grace and peace to post. Tenebras, Lux 1647. Good to see you, bro. I was just talking to you not too long ago, I think, in Jim Green's live. Good to see you. Wow.
So they recommend books like this, which is the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary, where scholars have been writing for ages.
Seems those go hand to hand. You got to have the Apocrypha, then you have to have Zondervan's Compact Bible Dictionary, and then From Babylon to Timbuktu. Anybody want to name another book that's a must-have if you're a Hebrew Israelite? Because that's another one I'm going to do. That one's pretty interesting as well. I'll give you a hint. It was post-Reformation polemics against the Catholic Church, but now it's being used by Hebrew Israelites against Protestants. Anybody know what that book is?
That Negroes, black people, are not Africans. And then you've also got this book that the brothers recommend called From Babylon to Timbuktu, which shows how we, the Israelites, went from living in Israel to fleeing deeper into Africa, eventually ending up in West Africa, where we were later enslaved. And of course, because the brothers are teaching online, you know, YouTube is an international platform, so all different people of other nations are also learning this truth as well.
And I wanted to read something. It's from a book called From Babylon to Timbuktu.
Listen very carefully what this lady says.
And if you can get this book, I would encourage it because it's really interesting. There is a paragraph, here on page 84. It says, in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of Black Jewish slaves. So,
interesting. So the assertion's been made. Don't you love that? How that it's just the assertion has been made. So yeah, we must say it's got to be true. Next one is From Babylon Timbuktu on undiscovered reads. This person's going to hype it up as well.
Today, let's delve deeper into the book From Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph R. Windsor. The book is a comprehensive exploration of the historical journey of African civilizations from ancient times to the modern era. Windsor meticulously traces the origins, migrations, and contributions of Black people, particularly focusing on their roles in the development of early civilizations in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond. Windsor begins by examining the early civilizations of Mesopotamia, often referred to as the cradle of civilization. He discusses the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, highlighting their advancements in writing, law, architecture, and astronomy. These societies, predominantly composed of Black individuals, laid the groundwork for many aspects of modern civilization. The narrative then shifts to Egypt and Kush, two of the most influential African civilizations. Windsor emphasizes the achievements of these societies in areas such as mathematics, medicine, engineering, and art. He also explores the cultural and political exchanges between Egypt and its neighbors, including the influence of Nubian pharaohs during the 25th dynasty. One of the key themes of the book is the migration of African peoples and their influence on other regions. Windsor traces the movement of Black populations from the Nile Valley to West Africa, the Middle East, and even into Europe. He argues that these migrations played a crucial role in the spread of knowledge, culture, and technology. Windsor frequently references the Bible, particularly the book of Genesis, to support his historical narrative. He identifies connections between biblical figures and African civilizations, suggesting that many of the patriarchs and prophets were of African descent. This perspective challenges traditional interpretations of biblical history and emphasizes the centrality of Africa in the ancient world. The title of the book refers to the city of Timbuktu, a symbol of African intellectual and cultural achievement. Windsor describes Timbuktu as a major center of learning and trade during the medieval period, renowned for its universities, libraries, and scholars. The city's legacy is a testament to the enduring contributions of African civilizations to global knowledge and culture. Windsor concludes by discussing the legacy of these ancient civilizations and their impact on the modern world. He argues that the contributions of Black people have been systematically overlooked or erased from mainstream historical narratives. By reclaiming this history, Windsor aims to inspire a sense of pride and identity among people of African descent. From Babylon to Timbuktu is a thought-provoking and meticulously researched work that challenges conventional views of history. Windsor's narrative is both a celebration of African achievements and a call to recognize the profound impact of Black civilizations on the world. The book serves as a reminder of the rich and diverse heritage of African peoples and their enduring contributions to human progress. I hope this expanded summary provides a deeper understanding of the book. To learn more about the book check link in the description, subscribe and like the video.
What is right is to love.
I'm on mute. Sorry about that, guys. So the reason I'm actually doing this, and this is not to harp on any one group to just discredit any group of people of doing something spectacular through human history. It's not what I'm aiming for. It's just we have to be truthful. That's the main purpose of being truthful. We, all of us, Vocab, Jim Green, Jude, Reginald, we strive, we do our best of our abilities to demonstrate truth. And when we have works such as this, and there have been white supremacist propaganda as well, which we bring those out as well. But It's the main purpose. Are we trying to be truthful and actually do history, or are we trying to do what we want to be, historical revisionists? I don't know. So here he is, the man himself. We're not going to play this whole thing. And this is, it's about like 8 years old, I would say. So let's look at it with fresh eyes. He's actually talking to IUIC, and they're just eating it up. You know, this really is the confirmation bias they were looking for. And the man himself standing right before them, just really revealing this truth to them. So you see how they gravitate to him. And we'll listen to what he says, because I can't recall exactly what he says here, but we'll play a couple minutes.
Of mercy and walk humbly before your God. And this is what Enoch was. And we need to live like he did. He was a man, as it says in the Hebrew tongue, he hit halech im Elohim. That means he walked humbly or walked with God. And that means we must walk with God and be righteous and be spiritual in all our actions and the way we treat one another. This is what's important, because through the violation of the law, this is why and how we went into captivity in the United States of America.
So as you can see, he's kind of really got the same narrative as IUIC themselves, even though he himself not being a one Wester. You can see it all comes together. You see the overlapping ideologies. He could be specifically non-one Wester, but when he talks like that, our disobedience, we went to slavery in America, it's part of the curses, that's a one West thing. So very interesting, right?
Worst captivity wherever we ever went through. Right. We've been through many captivities. There was Egypt, there was Babylon, there was Assyria, there was Greece, there was Rome, and United States of America, total destruction of the black man. But now, once we get on the right course, we need to follow it and pursue it. Pursue righteousness. That will save us. When we are righteous, nobody can subdue us. Yes. And when you read the scripture, you read about the story of Balaam. He couldn't just curse Israel. Because Israel was righteous. That's right. And he tried to get Balaam to Balak.
I would say Israel was righteous. They had the providence and protection of God. If we're being completely honest with the Bible, it was more about what God was doing. Anyway,
he tried to get Balaam to curse Israel, and he couldn't find no sin or iniquity among Jacob. That's right. Therefore, he had to back up and said, "If you gave me my whole house of silver and gold, I cannot curse Israel." That's right. That's right. We cannot curse whom God has blessed. That's right. So I just want to thank you all. I enjoyed myself immensely today, and I hope that we can have a relationship from now on into the future. Amen.
Interesting. Very interesting. So let's get into the actual book itself. Finally, From Babylon to Timbuktu, and I want to blow this up. Let me see if I can make it a different view. That might be better. So page 14 of chapter 1, he writes, there was an Ethiopian civilization in southern Mesopotamia, Babylon, but the people in this region, let me know if you guys can read it. I can blow it up bigger if you need it. People in this region did not use their tribal name, Ethiopia, to designate their nationality. They called themselves by the name of the cities that they constructed and inhabited, or they called themselves by an event that happened there. For example, God confused the language of the people at the Tower of Babel. Babel means confusion in Hebrew. This is why the Ethiopian tribes called themselves Babylonians, referring to the name of the cities that they constructed. So, what's the scholarly integrity? Let's look here. I'm here. Scholarly integrity. Let's look into it. So, the statement there, really, it just lacks scholarly support. There is no credible historical, archaeological, or textual evidence that directly links Ethiopian civilizations to the establishment or development of Babylon or southern Mesopotamia. Babylon, located in modern-day Iraq, was founded by the Akkadians and later became a central city in the Babylonian Empire under rulers like Hammurabi. I'm going to play you a video of Hammurabi and the law stele, whatever you call it, the stone with the inscriptions on it. Archaeological evidence, excavations in Mesopotamia have uncovered extensive records, including cuneiform tablets. And that brings me to my next slide. So cuneiform tablets, right? They detail the history and culture of Babylon. These records do not indicate any Ethiopian presence in the founding or early development of Babylon. And the consensus among historians, archaeologists, because that's who you really want to be going to if you're looking for a primary source. If we have time, I didn't know I'm already 40 minutes in. If we have time, we're going to go into how you actually find a source, a primary source. It's a long list of things to check off in order to be considered a credible source. But the consensus among historians and archaeologists is that Babylon was primarily an Akkadian and later an Amorite city. So there's no peer-reviewed research that supports the claim of Ethiopian civilization being responsible for the development of Babylon. Then he goes on to say that the people of... So there's a problem with that, where an Ethiopian civilization in southern Mesopotamia. So there's the evidence for that. But also the people in this region did not use their tribal name Ethiopia to designate their nationality. That's what he says. So it's just basically misleading because it implies that Ethiopia was a known and relevant tribal name in Mesopotamia, which it wasn't. The name Ethiopia, from the Greek, Ethiopia, if that's how you say it, was used by the ancient Greeks to refer to the land south of Egypt, primarily in what is now Sudan and Ethiopia. There is no historical connection between the term Ethiopia and the people of southern Mesopotamia. Again, the archaeological evidence is what we're talking about. So when you make a claim like that, you can trace it back to the actual land of what you're talking about. That's primary. So if you're going to mention Babylon, you need to be Babylon. It needs to be a Babylonian source. So archaeological evidence that suggests any connection between the people of Mesopotamia and the term Ethiopia, it's just not there. The Babylonians and their predecessors used Sumerian, Akkadian, and Amorite names and terms for their people, or cities and peoples. Then he goes on to say they called themselves by the name of the cities they constructed and inhabited. So it's really just somewhat inaccurate, as ancient Mesopotamian peoples did identify themselves with their city-states, Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, etc. But it doesn't support the broader claim of Ethiopian presence. See the difference? They called themselves by an event. Let's go back to what he actually wrote here. They called themselves by an event that happened for example, God confused the languages of the people in the Tower of Babel. So he's talking about Genesis 11, 1 through 9. I won't have time to go to it, but it's the story of the Tower of Babel, and it's often interpreted symbolically by most Bible scholars, I would agree. Then it's really a theological narrative rather than a historical linguistic explanation. So that's really what's going on in that. And the whole point is what? That God was in... Mankind was a little more primitive, simpler. He confuses the language. Is this how we go back to find archaeological evidence of when these languages broke off? Yeah, you could possibly get to that, but to the actual point and event of the Tower of Babel, speculative, But the whole point is the theological narrative. So the idea of Babylon, that the Babylonians named themselves after the confusion of language, is not supported by any historical evidence. So it's a theological interpretation rather than a historical interpretation. Then he goes on to say Ethiopian tribes call themselves Babylonians, referring to the names of the city they constructed. So this right here, this is pretty interesting. It's just literally, well, it's not interesting. It's just without any foundation. There is no evidence that Ethiopian tribes were involved in the construction of Babylon, or that they even called themselves Babylonians. It's just speculative. It's so unsupported. So I wrote, but yeah, if you can see right here on this slide, for instance, if you look on the left, that is the Ge'ez language of the ancient Ethiopians, okay? On the right is the Akkadian language of ancient Babylonians. They're not the same linguistically. They are very, very different. So he is drawing connections between Ethiopian civilizations and Babylon without any historical archaeological or linguistic evidence to support these claims. So it's anachronistic or anachristic, as I've been told. I've been saying it wrong. Anachronistic. Geographically misplaced, term as the term was not associated with Mesopotamia. So there is no Ethiopian peoples, tribes, or languages found in ancient Mesopotamia. And there's numerous things that I could have brought up, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh. Epic of Gilgamesh is an ancient Mesopotamian text that provides insight into the culture, beliefs, and history of early Mesopotamian civilizations with no mention of Ethiopian connections. They're just as the Hammurabi Code is the law code of Babylon. I'm gonna play the video for this. It's the law code of Babylon, written by the Babylonian king Hammurabi, further demonstrating the native development of Babylonian civilization. So check this out. This is super cool.
We're in the Louvre in Paris, looking at one of their most famous objects. This is the law code stele of King Hammurabi.
It's interesting to me that this is one of the most popular objects to look at here, and I think it's because of our modern interest and reliance on law as the founding principles of a civilization. And this is such an ancient object. This is nearly 4,000 years old.
A stele is a tall carved object. This one is carved in relief at the top, and then below that and on all sides we have inscribed cuneiform. It's written in the language of Akkadian,
which was used for official government decrees.
But that's the language. The script is cuneiform. It's divided into 3 parts. There's a prologue, which talks about the scene that's being represented at the top, the investiture of Hammurabi. What we see is the king on the left. He's smaller, and he's facing the god Shamash. This is the son.
Look how long ago that was. So King Hammurabi, he ruled Babylonia from 1792 to 1750 BC. That's a long time ago. This would have to be, if we're going to be, there's a late period of the Egyptian dynasties. There is a earlier date for the Egyptian dynasties as to when Israel would have been in there with Moses. So we could possibly put them, Robbie, maybe I forgot, was it 19th dynasty? So 13th century BC, so 400 years. But yeah, it's great how you can put it in perspective how long ago this was. This is ancient stuff. And it's, it's so sad when it's brought down to race, ethnicity in a Western context, which is why I hate how they do history. Well, what color were they? I mean, this is some really interesting artifacts of antiquity. Why are you not just fascinated by these ancient people who felt the same things we felt, experienced life and stresses and love and, relationships, but it just, what color were they? It's just, to narrow it down to this bias is what drives us crazy when we're trying to just, say all of human history, not just a certain group.
God, the God of justice.
And we can tell he's a god because of the special horned crown that he wears and the flames or light that emanate from his shoulders.
We can think of this as a kind of divine light, the way that in so much Christian imagery we see a halo.
And we have that composite view that we often see in ancient Egyptian and ancient Near Eastern art, where the shoulders are frontal, but the face is represented in profile.
Shamash sits on a throne, and if you look closely, you can see under his feet the representation of mountains that he rises from each day. He's giving to the king a scepter and a ring. These are signs of power.
Hammurabi is demonstrating here that these are divine laws.
That his authority comes from Shamash.
So we have more than 300 laws here.
And they're very particular. Scholars believe that they weren't so much written by the king as listed from judgments that have already been meted out.
They're legal precedents, and they take the form of announcing an action and its consequences. So if you do X, Y is the consequence.
So, for example, if a man builds a house and the house falls on the owner, the builder is put to death.
So there's a kind of equivalence, and this might remind us of the biblical law of an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth.
Which is also found on the stele, and it's important and interesting to note that the stele predates that biblical text. The last part of the text, what is often referred to as the epilogue, speaks to the posterity of the king, of the importance of his rule, and the idea that he will be remembered for all time.
This is certainly not a unique stele in terms of recording laws, but it does survive largely intact. When it was discovered, it was broken only into 3 parts, which you can still see today.
These laws, almost 4,000 years old, tell us a tremendous amount about Babylonian culture, about what was important to them. So many of these laws deal with agricultural issues, issues of irrigation, and are clearly expressing points of tension in society.
A lot of them have to do with family life, too. And the king is, after all, responsible for the peace and prosperity and feeding of his people.
And the stele is such a wonderful reminder that Mesopotamia was such an advanced culture. Here, almost 4,000 years ago, we have cities that are dependent on good crop yields, that require laws to maintain civil society, and a reminder of the debt that the world owes to the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, an area that is seeing so much conflict now.
So how cool is that? So if you wanted to find it, say we're going to help them out. If you wanted to find a primary source, you would need to see your assertions in that stele right there in the inscription. That's a first-hand account primary source. Other works that talk about it are called secondary sources. So what Windsor is doing is he's only using secondary sources, but he's still twisting those secondary sources out of their context. And we're going to show it later on in the end, really all the sources he used through his whole entire book, how they're used, and what the actual original author was really meant by it. But here's the difference between the Akkadian and Ge'ez languages. So if our assertion, if their assertion is that the ancient Ethiopians basically built Mesopotamia, then the language, we could trace it linguistically. But notice the differences between Akkadian and Ge'ez. Shout out to Mom in the building. I appreciate you. I've been working hard on this one. There's a lot of information, and plus I'm trying to juggle all the things at once. So, yeah, let's go into this.
Akkadian. Ge'ez. Akkadian is an extinct East Semitic language once spoken in ancient Mesopotamia, including regions like Akkad, Assyria, and Babylonia. It was used from the 3rd millennium BC until the 8th century BC, when all...
See the dates? So, Akkadian 2500 BC to 100 CE. The Ethiopian language, extinct as a spoken language, but used as a liturgical language in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawido Church. So that language is outdated, but it is used in the Orthodox Ethiopian Church. Just thought I'd point that out.
Old Aramaic gradually replaced it. Named after the city of Akkad, Akkadian is the earliest documented Semitic language and was written using the cuneiform script, which was initially for Sumerian, but later adapted for other regional languages. The close contact and prestige of Sumerian significantly influenced Akkadian's phonology, vocabulary, and syntax, leading scholars to describe their relationship as Sprachbund. Ge'ez is an ancient Semitic language originating from the Horn of Africa, specifically Ethiopia and Eritrea. It served as the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, Eritrean Orthodox Church, and Beta Israel or Ethiopian Jews. Historically, Ge'ez was the language of the Aksumite Empire and a medium for its administration, literature, and inscriptions. While it ceased to function as a spoken vernacular centuries ago, it remains preserved in religious texts, liturgies, and cultural traditions, influencing modern Ethiopian and Eritrean languages such as Amharic, Tigrinya, and Tigri.
Ishten,
Ahadu,
Shina,
Listen to the different pronunciations of these two different languages.
Kil'etu,
Shalash,
Shalastu,
Erbe,
Arba'atu,
Chomish,
Khamistu,
Shedish,
Sidistu,
Tsebe,
Sab'atu,
Tamane,
Samanitu,
Tishe,
Tis'atu,
Esher,
Ashartu,
Abuni, Shaina Shamee Washibo, Shumka Litakab,
Abuna Zeba Samayat, Itkadda Simika,
Shahotu Conflictiam, Eli Artsetim, Malaina Shamee, Plebaka Likashid.
تمتع منقشتك ويكون فقعدك بكما بسماي كما هو بمدر
Omam Kum Matani, Shashutuko, Idnani Yashishu.
سيساينا زللنا عنتنا حبلنا يوم
Uhituni jokkiniati, kimasunoti shaananiati, ihattu nudzakashunuti.
خدق لنا عبسانا وجيجاينا كما نحنني نخدق لزا عبس لنا
Uanna libbi avnimlate reddeniatim, ishtu lemuttim shudzibniati.
إيتاب أن إجزيئو وستمنسوت ألا أدخلنا وبالحنا أم كل أكوي آمين.
Mm. Interesting, right? Yeah, so they're not the same. They are definitely different languages. So what I put here on that assertion, chapter 1, okay, that whole assertion, we're basically saying, and this is my statement because it just lacks any evidence that Ethiopian tribes were involved in the construction of Babylon or that they called themselves Babylonians. It's just speculative and an unsupported assertion. So I'll stand by those words. Yeah, because there's just a lot, there's just lacking evidence. Anyway, next chapter. So we're not going to go through all the chapters. I think I only have this chapter because there's some things to go in through here and then a couple sources that he misuses. I'm going to recommend some good sources and then give an overall analysis of this book and see if I can get it done in a timely manner because there's so much information to go over. But anyway, chapter 2, if you guys can see it, hopefully you guys can read it. I don't know. It might be too small. I'll read it for you. It says, so chapter 2, page 24, he writes, in ancient Israel, when a man had a white spot in his skin or white or yellow hair or white skin somewhat reddish, he was pronounced unclean. All people who were victims of this shameful disease were isolated outside of the camp or city. Those that had leprosy were called lepers, and they had to shout, unclean, unclean. All people in the ancient world who had yellow hair and leprosy were despised and segregated. This is the one reason the white supremacists discriminate against the black people today. Kind of a leap, you know. Miriam and Aaron spoke out against Moses and defamed his character because he married an Ethiopian woman. As a punishment, God struck Miriam with leprosy and she turned white as snow. Now, many people have deceived themselves in thinking that Miriam and Aaron spoke against her because she was a black woman, but this is not the case because Miriam, Aaron, and Moses were all black, it says. All black. They spoke against Moses because the Ethiopian woman was of a different religion. The color issue did not exist in their day. So you have some truths, some speculation, some conspiracy, and some anachronistic. So I want to show you the difference between, and the common person can see the difference between. So here's some white folks for you. Here's some Edomites, if you will. Here you go. So on the left, we see the skin diseases of Caucasian people. If that's the whole entire argument. Let me fix my camera. I don't know what my camera looks like. Well, I guess I can. No, I guess it's fine. Whatever. Go in a little more. I think my camera moved. 1 second. Yeah, it looks like it moved off the thing. Well, let me move my camera. Let me go off. There it goes. All right, we're back. So that literally just happened. My camera literally fell. That is hilarious. Okay, let me move myself over just a little bit. Just fell off. Oh, what a disaster. Okay, we're fine there. Anyway, so white folks, skin disease on the left, healthy skin on the right. Notice the buttery smooth on the right, little on the left, there are skin diseases. So the idea that you can't be white and have white spots and they won't show up because it's clearly right there. Clearly, you can see it. So the text suggests that any white spots, white or yellow hair, or reddish skin were automatically considered signs of leprosy and led to a person being declared unclean. So in ancient Israel, the laws concerning skin disease, as described in Leviticus 13, we're going to go into it, were complex and included various conditions, not just leprosy. In modern medicine, we call it Hansen's disease. World Health Organization, Hansen's disease. That's a good source. The description of symptoms in Leviticus might include what modern medicine identifies as vitiligo, psoriasis, fungal infections, or other skin conditions. So, like I said, the World Health Organization provides a clear definition and understanding of Hansen's disease, which does not align with the description of leprosy. A clear description of the text provided. So, the ancient understanding of these diseases was not about ritual purity. It was more about ritual purity than scientific diagnosis. I'll go to our next slide here. So there's a theological implication with this, and I don't think Windsor is implementing the nuances of this. What have you? So all people with yellow hair and leprosy were despised and segregated. So that's the claim. Okay, so he's inaccurate that the claim of all people with yellow hair and leprosy were universally despised and segregated oversimplifies the historical context and medical knowledge. It just does. Leprosy, as understood today, does not cause yellow hair. Hair discoloration could result from malnutrition or other conditions, not specifically leprosy. The social and religious response to leprosy in ancient society varied significantly. And you'll see that in Leviticus 13. So modern dermatology and historical anthropology provide no evidence that yellow hair was specifically associated with leprosy or that it was a universal cause for segregation. And you can find that. You could just Google dermatology hair discoloration to find that. Any links between leprosy and white supremacy, which is kind of interesting. The text makes a leap from ancient leprosy laws to modern white supremacy. Like I said earlier, what a leap, you know. He's suggesting a direct connection that is historically and logically unsupported. The discrimination by white supremacists against black people is rooted in socio-political and economic histories, particularly from the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism, not ancient skin disease laws. The history of racism, particularly white supremacy, is well documented and not connected to ancient skin disease laws. The emergence of racial discrimination is linked to specific historical developments such as colonialism and the pseudo-scientific theories of race from the 18th and 19th centuries. So our friends over the Hebrew Israelite community tend to start the, racism from the 18th and 19th century colonialism mindset, not even understanding the ancient world. The ancient world did not function that way. So, more importantly, he goes into the story of Miriam and Aaron. The text that the story of Miriam and Aaron defaming Moses because he married an Ethiopian woman was not about race, but about religion, and that all three were black. So that's the assertion. But the Bible does not specify the skin color of Moses, Aaron, or Miriam. So you can assume you can't say it's there, right? But when they come against us on the Trinity, Jesus being God, it's verbatim. Does it need to verbatim say the way they need it? No, we can go in Scripture and pretty much demonstrate that those things are true. Those things are biblically consistent. The notion that they were all black is not supported by historical evidence. The Bible does not. It does mention that Moses married a Cushite woman, which some has interpreted as an Ethiopian woman. However, the significance of this event is theological, not necessarily racial. Biblical scholars, commentaries, they debated the significance of Moses' marriage, but there is no consensus that race was a factor in the story. Mia Mom touched on this on the legacy of Miriam, if you guys want to check that out. It was an act of jealousy, but yes, also with discrimination, but it's not proving that Moses, Aaron, and Miriam were black. It's just not there. And the narrative of that story likely focuses on issues of authority, divine selection, rather than ethnicity or race. Yes. So we can look at World Health Organization, Hansen's disease, dermatology, race and racism in the modern world, Moses, the Cushite woman, Bible commentaries. They provide a context of biblical stories, interpretations. I think those would be good. Shout out to the one and only Jim Green. Good show today, brother. That was awesome. You had Maurice Price on. That was so cool. So what's going on in Leviticus 13 is really the test for leprosy, and verse 14 is how it's treated. But this is not a medical, Aaron's Aaron's not a doctor. He's a priest, right? Let me find my slide. I think it is 24:2. Give me a second here. 24:2. There it is. I think this is the most important part of that assertion. Where do I go at? I think I had it. Yeah, so let's go to let's just open up Leviticus 13 here. If you guys can see that, Leviticus 13. I want to move. I need to move. I need to move somewhere else. No, let me put myself right here. Give me a second. Let me edit myself out here, guys. I'm going to put myself right there. Works for me. Save, update, boom. There we are. So we're going to be up there on the top. Hopefully you can read what I'm doing. So we're going into the significance of leprosy. For stop point reading 13. Okay, 24:2. Give me a second, guys. I think I have it here. Go up. Anyway, we'll just read it. Let's just read it. I'm wasting time. So the test for leprosy, Leviticus chapter 13. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, when a man has on the skin of his body a swelling or a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes an infection of leprosy on the skin of the body, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest. No, Aaron the doctor, or to the one of his sons, the priest. The priest shall look at the mark on the skin of the body, and if the hair in the infection has turned white and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is an infection of leprosy. When the priest has looked at him, he shall pronounce him unclean. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair on it has not turned white, then the priest shall isolate him who has infection for 7 days. The priest shall look at him on the 7th day, and if in his eyes the infection has not changed and the infection has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 more days. The priest shall look at him again on the 7th day, and if the infection has faded and the mark has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads farther on the skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleaning, he shall appear again to the priest. The priest shall look, and if the scab has spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When the infection of the leprosy is on a man, I'm way too high. Hold on. When the infection of leprosy is on a man, then he shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall then look, and if there is a white swelling in the skin, and it has turned the hair white, and there is quick raw flesh in the swelling. Okay. It is a chronic leprosy on the skin of his body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not isolate him, for he is unclean. If the leprosy breaks out farther on the skin, and the leprosy covers all the skin of him who has the infection from his head, even to his feet, as far as the priest can see, then the priest shall look, and behold, if the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall pronounce clean him who has the infection. It has all turned white and is unclean. But whenever, literally white, this isn't emphasizing European. This is white. Like white people can have this. European people can have this. I just showed you on that slide there. But whatever raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. So what's going on in this chapter? What does he see? What's God's provision for Israel? Cleanliness, sanitation for one, but this is a foreshadowing of what? Sin. This is a clear demonstration of sin. When someone is unclean, this is transfers into the New Testament, what we see. The priest shall look at the raw flesh and shall pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. It is leprosy. Or if the raw flesh turns again and is changed to white, then he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall look at him, and behold, if the infection is turned to white, then the priest shall pronounce clean him who has the infection. He is clean. When the body has a boil on its skin, so it's another form of leprosy, a boil on the skin, and those are painful, and it is healed. And in the place of the boil there is a white swelling or a reddish white bright spot, then it shall be shown to the priest. And I don't care. Any red or swelling is going to show up on anybody. White swelling, reddish white, bright spots, boils. They're all going to look like skin infections. I don't care what color skin you have. And the priest shall look, and behold, if it appears to be lower than the skin, and the hair on it has turned white, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the infection of leprosy. It has broken out in the boil. The boils of Egypt? Yeah, the boils of Egypt. But if the priest looks at it, and behold, there are no white hairs in it, and it is not lower than the skin, and is faded, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. And if it spreads farther on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infection. But if the bright spot remains in its place and does not spread, it is only the scar of a boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if the body sustains in its skin a burn by fire, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the priest shall look at it. If the hair in the bright spot has turned white, and it appears to be deeper than the skin, it is leprosy. It has broken out in the burn. There's another one. Burn is another skin infection. Therefore, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infection of leprosy. But if the priest looks at it, and indeed there is no white hair in the bright spot, and it is no deeper than the skin, but is dim, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. And the priest shall look at him on the 7th day. If it spreads farther in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It's an infection of leprosy. But if the bright spot remains in its place and has not spread in the skin, but is dim, it is the swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. For it is only the scar of a burn. Now, if a man or a woman has infection on the head or on his beard, then the priest shall look at the infection. If it appears to be deeper than the skin, there is thin yellowish hair in it, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a scale. It's a scale. It is leprous of the head or the beard. It's another skin disease. But if the priest looks at the infection of the scale, and indeed it appears to be one no deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall isolate the person with the scaly infection for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall look at the infection, and if the scale has not spread and no yellowish hair has grown in it, the appearance of the scale is no deeper than the skin. Then he shall shave himself, but he shall not shave the scale. I wonder why. Shave yourself, but you can't shave the scale. What happens if you shave the scale? You will open up the infection again, probably spreading it more. So here's God's provision for literally cleanliness, sanitation. He wants them healthy. Does he not want Israel to be healthy? And the priest shall isolate the persons with the scale 7 more days. Then on the 7th day, the priest shall look at the scale, and if the scale has not spread in the skin, it appears to be no deeper than the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scale spreads farther in the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall look at him, and if the scale has spread in the skin, the priest need not seek for the yellowish hair. He is unclean. If in his sight the scale has remained, however, and black hair has grown in it, the scale has healed, he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or a woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, even white bright spots, then the priest shall look, and if the bright spots on the skin of their bodies are faint white, it is eczema that has broken out on the skin. He is clean. Eczema. Now, if a man loses the hair of his head, he is bald. He is clean. If his head becomes bald at the front of the sides, he is bald on the forehead. He is clean. But if on the bald head or on the bald forehead there occurs a reddish white infection, it is leprosy breaking out on his bald head or on his bald forehead. Then the priest shall look at him, and if the swelling of the infection is reddish white on his bald head or on his bald forehead, like the appearance of leprosy in the skin of the body, he is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean, his infection is on his head. See the themes going on here? As for the leper who has the infection, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall be uncovered, and he shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. When a garment has a mark of leprosy in it, whether it is wool, a wool garment, or a linen garment, whether it is warp or woof, of linen or of wool, whether in leather or in any article made of leather, if the mark is greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather or in the warp or in the woof or in any article of leather, it is leprous mark and shall be shown to the priest. Then the priest shall look at the mark and shall quarantine the article with the mark for 7 days. He shall then look at the mark on the 7th day. If the mark has spread in the garment, whether in the warp or in the woof or in the leather, whether the purpose for which the leather is used, the mark is leprous malignancy, it is unclean. It is unclean. So he shall burn the garment, whether the warp or the woof, in wool or in linen, or any article of leather in which the mark occurs, or it is a leprous malignancy, it shall be burned in the fire. But if the priest shall look, and indeed the mark has not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in any article of leather, then the priest shall order them to wash the thing in which the mark occurred, and he shall be quarantined for 7 more days. Almost done. After the article with the mark has been washed, the priest shall go again look, and if the mark has not changed its appearance, even though the mark has not spread, it is unclean. You shall burn it in the fire. Whether an eating away has produced bareness on the top or on the front of it, then the priest looks. If the mark has faded after it has been washed, then he shall tear it out of the garment, or out of the leather, whether from the warp or from the woof. And if it appears again in the garment, whether in the warp or the woof, or in any article of leather, it is an outbreak. It's the whole point of it. It's an outbreak. God's providence to try to stop things from outbreaking. So the article with the mark shall be burned in the fire. The garment, whether the warp or the woof, or an article of leather from which the mark has departed when you washed it, it shall be washed a second time and will be clean. This is the law for the mark of leprosy in a garment of wool or linen, whether in the warp or in the woof, or in any article of leather, for pronouncing it clean or unclean. No, we're not going to go into the next chapter, but it's the laws of cleansing as a leper. So what do we have here? What is the assertion by Windsor, right? It's right there on the bottom. By examining the biblical exegesis of leprosy, it becomes clear that the references to leprosy in the Bible are rooted in concerns about ritual purity, divine judgment, and the community's relationship with God. The use of leprosy as a symbol of sin and impurity in the Bible reflects theological, not racial concerns. Very important. So that's what Windsor is doing on that chapter, and that's just chapter 2. Which is very, very sad. Next slide. Okay, so chapter 6. I think it's the last chapter page we go after, actually. So he says, many black Jews, so chapter 6, the final dispersion of the black Jews of Africa. Many black Jews were established inland and along the coast of Angola, the Congo, and Gabon. Frederick Ratzel writes that the tribes on the Luango coast and the Cabinda, north of the Congo River, were once Christianized. Ratzel observed a ceremony of baptism followed by circumcision. However, these tribes were Jewish in origin. The Christianity Ratzel saw among them was a disguise. The circumcision practiced among them is of Jewish derivation. The Christians in Portugal did not practice circumcision. In fact, Cecil Roth wrote that circumcision among Jews in Portugal was practically an impossibility, for its discovery was equal to a death sentence. Godbey wrote concerning the Mavumbu Jews on the Luango coast. So there's the assertion. Let's see, number 2. I got my notes. 126, 128.6. I got everything coded and everything. That way I can hop to it faster, which I'm not even doing. Okay, so there's the assertion. There is the assertion. Jewish presence in Central Africa is the main assertion here. So the notion of Jewish communities or practices existing in Central Africa is not supported by strong historical evidence. While there have been isolated claims of Jewish groups in Africa, such as the Lemba people in Southern Africa who practice certain customs believed to be of Jewish origin, these are exceptions rather than the norms. The idea of Jewish origins in the areas mentioned, like Angola, Congo, and Gabon, is not widely accepted by historians. So most historians agree that the spread of Judaism in sub-Saharan Africa is limited and often the result of later migrations or conversions rather than ancient Jewish communities. He says that Christian practices, he also says Christian practices, they were disguised for Judaism. Interesting, right? But the claim that Christianity in these regions was a disguise for Judaism it's really speculative. You see a lot of speculation in this book, and there's just nothing is sourced. The spread of Christianity in Central Africa during the colonial period was driven by European missionary activity, and while there were instances of syncretism, the assertion that entire Christian communities were secretly Jewish is not supported by credible sources. Now, he mentions Frederick Ratzel right here, the gentleman here pictured. Actually, let's go to what he's actually talking about. Talks about Frederick Ratzel. Where's he at? There he is. So, Frederick Ratzel, he's a German geographer and ethnographer known for his extensive studies of various cultures. In his work, The History of Mankind, I have it sourced there, The History of Mankind, Ratzel documented numerous societies and their customs regarding the tribes along the Loango coast and Cabinda. Ratzel noted the presence of both Christian and indigenous practices, including rituals like circumcision. However, he did not assert that these tribes were of Jewish origin or that their practices were derived from Judaism. Instead, Ratzel approached these observations from the ethnographic perspective, aiming to document and understand the cultural practices without attributing them to external origins without substantial evidence. So Windsor's narrative, he kind of suggests that the tribe's Christian practices were a facade for underlying Jewish origins and that rituals like circumcision were a Jewish derivation. So Windsor's this interpretation extends beyond Ratzel's original observations. By asserting a Jewish origin for these tribes and their customs, Windsor introduces a hypothesis that Ratzel did not propose. So he's looking into something that Ratzel has put down. I can draw off that, then I'm going to keep going with an idea that I have, right? It's an extrapolation, basically, what he's doing. This extrapolation can be seen as a misrepresentation as it imposes an external explanation not supported by Ratzel's ethnographic data. So he's lacking the main point is that he's lacking the direct attribution. TWC, didn't see you there. How you doing, brother? Lack of direct attribution. So Ratzel's writings do not attribute Jewish origins to the tribes in question. Windsor's claim lacks direct support from Ratzel's work, indicating a deviation from the original source. That's one. You're going to see a whole list and slew of things he's doing in his book. Then we have the ethnographic context that Ratzel emphasized. So Ratzel emphasized the complexity and uniqueness of indigenous cultures, attributing their practices solely to external influences such as Judaism oversimplifies this complexity and overlooks the indigenous origins of rituals like circumcision, which are prevalent in various African cultures for reasons unrelated to Judaism. So even though they were circumcisions, they were unrelated to Judaism because it was a rite of passage. Contemporary, then he has the scholarly consensus, which disagrees with him. Contemporary anthropological studies do not support the notion of Jewish origins for the tribes along the Luengo coast and Cabinda. Windsor's interpretation aligns more with speculative theories than with established ethnographic research. So Windsor, he's portraying Ratzel and his observations to appear, he's misrepresenting the original ethnographic account by introducing unsupported assertions of Jewish origins. And then he interprets, he's skewing the interpretation of Ratzel's work. This misrepresentation underscores the importance of critically evaluating secondary interpretations and consulting primary sources to ensure accurate understanding of historical and cultural analysis. And check out his work, The History of Mankind, Frederick Ratzel. So the next, and he also mentioned another gentleman by the name of Cecil Roth, okay? Cecil Roth is also mentioned on that page. I believe it was what? Let's go back. Page 128 of chapter 6. So page 128 of chapter 6, Windsor references historian Cecil Roth to support his claims about the challenges of practicing circumcision among Jews in Portugal during periods of persecution. To assess whether Windsor misrepresented Roth's work, we need to examine Roth's original writings and compare them with Windsor's interpretation. So here's Cecil Roth's observations, and you can find that in the history of the Marranos. History of the Marranos. I sourced it there. Cecil Roth was a renowned historian specializing in Jewish history, particularly the experiences of Jews in medieval and early modern Europe. In his book, A History of the Marranos, Roth discusses the severe restrictions and dangers faced by Jews in Portugal, especially concerning the practice of circumcision. He notes that during the Inquisition, Jewish rituals were suppressed and the discovery of such practices could lead to severe punishment, including death. Roth provides accounts of the clandestine nature of Jewish observance during this period, highlighting the extreme risks involved. Windsor cites Roth to emphasize the impossibility of practicing circumcision among Jews in Portugal, suggesting that any discovery of such an act was tantamount to a death sentence. So while Roth does describe the dangers associated with Jewish rituals during the Inquisition, Windsor's portrayal may amplify the severity by implying an absolute impossibility, whereas Roth indicates that despite the risks, some Jews continue to practice their faith in secrecy. It's a selective emphasis. So what Windsor's doing is called a selective emphasis. Windsor focuses on the most extreme aspects of Roth's accounts, potentially giving the impression that Jewish practices were entirely eradicated, whereas Roth acknowledges the persistence of clandestine observance among some Jews. And then there's a lack of nuance. So the lack of nuance, Roth's work provides a nuanced view of the varied experiences of Jews during the Inquisition, including instances of resistance and secret practices. This is vast to the open to the public. You can look in those things. Windsor's interpretation may overlook this complexity, presenting a more one-dimensional perspective. That's something you don't want to do when you're using someone as a source. You don't want to use them as one dimension to really fit your narrative. I myself am being reformed. I wouldn't want to just go down the corridors of time and look at all the reformers that are shed in a good light. Why not look at the? There's the Reformation 95 Theses on the door, Martin Luther. Then we have the almost to the last of his days to his death, anti-Semitic Martin Luther. To have a balanced view of both sides, it really demonstrates that you're upholding the source's integrity. Third, contextual differences. Roth's analysis is situated with a broader historical context, examining the socio-political factors influencing Jewish life in Portugal. While Windsor's use of Roth's work may extract specific points without fully conveying this context, leading to potential misrepresentations. So while Windsor references Cecil Roth to support his narrative, there is an indication that he may have selectively emphasized certain aspects of Roth's work, potentially leading to a misrepresentation of the original context and the nuances provided by Roth. This underscores the importance of consulting primary sources directly to gain a comprehensive understanding of historical events and interpretations. So we'll go into some actual sources that I would recommend to people. Have I read all of these? No, but they are well-sourced, well-documented works on this subject. First, we have the Routes and Realms by Zaid Adrim. And then there's the Corpus of Early Arabic Sources for Western African History by Nehemiah Levzian and J.F.P. Hopkins. There is the African Diaspora in the Mediterranean Lands of Islam by John Hewick and Eve Trout Powell. African Dominion by Michael Gomez. And we probably can't read that text there. It says Black Jews in Africa and the Americas by Nathan Higgins. So those are actual sources. Let's go to, so I did that. So let's go into primary sources. Okay, so we'll go into his pseudo-historical claims by Rudolph Windsor. I just wanted to show you guys a couple things that he's doing. So I think it's this one. I want to say it's this one. So what is he doing? So what are these sources he's using? Is this the one? Primary sources. What are the sources that he's using? No, that's the ones. No, I don't want that one. Let's skip that because I don't know. So let's look at an actual demonstration of a primary source. I think that would be good for everybody. So we can actually see a primary source. Let's share this tab. Expedition Bible. Shout out to Expedition Bible. So what he's going to do is actually go into the actual place, the land. This is the... Oh, hold on. I thought my camera's going to mess up again. Looks like it wants to. It's going to fall off again. It's kind of falling off. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to fix my camera.
Welcome to Expedition Bible. In this video, I traveled to Egypt to explore one of the most significant discoveries ever made in biblical archaeology. Flinders Petrie is considered the father figure of the field of archaeology. And in his book, 70 Years in Archaeology, he tells the story of a discovery that he made in Egypt back in 1896. Petrie wrote, "To the astonishment of the rest of our party, I said at dinner that night, 'This will be better known in the world than anything else I have found.' He was right. 70 years in archaeology, and this was his greatest find." So I'm here at the Tel Aviv airport. I'm getting ready to leave the modern state of Israel to go explore evidence for ancient Israel. My first stop in Egypt is Luxor, ancient Thebes, where across the Nile River lay the ruins of the mortuary temples, where the pharaohs of old were once worshipped as gods. This one is the mortuary temple of Pharaoh Merneptah, who ruled Egypt from about 1213 to 1204 BC. And this is where, on a winter day in 1896, Flinders Petrie was excavating. Petrie wrote, "The site of Merneptah's temple was disastrously dull. I was tempted to leave it as fruitless. Then, in the last corner to be cleared, there lay a black granite stele, over 10 feet high and 5 wide." I'm standing in the mortuary temple of the pharaoh Merneptah. And this is where Flinders Petrie was excavating when he found this inscription. Today, you can go to the Cairo Museum and see the real stele that this is a replica of. The Merneptah stele. A stele is a stone shaped to stand upright and bear an inscription. We still use them today in cemeteries. Petrie wrote, "On looking beneath it, there was the inscription of Merneptah. I had the ground cut away below, blocking up the stele on stones, so that one could crawl in and lie on one's back, reading a few inches from one's nose. The excavation's epigrapher was a man named Spiegelberg, and Petrie wrote about him when he says, he lay there copying for an afternoon. This just cracks me up because, I mean, think about that. Think about what they did in 1896, where a hole is dug under an inscription and an epigrapher goes into that hole like a gopher and then spends a whole afternoon with the inscription literally this far away from his face with a candle, translating all of these words. I mean, that is one tough epigrapher. He lay there copying for an afternoon and came out saying, there are names and one I don't know is Sirar. Why, that is Israel, said I. So it is, and won't the reverends be pleased, was his reply. This is a replica of it here in the place of its discovery. The real one we can now go see in the Cairo Museum. So here we are in the Egyptian Museum. This is the Merneptah stele. I've done a lot of digging and found a lot of things. But if I found something like this 10.5-foot inscription, I would freak out because, I mean, look at this thing. Can you imagine 10.5-foot stele covered with an inscription on both sides? So on this side is the most famous name found in this entire inscription, which is right down here, the name Israel. It's agreed upon that this says Israel. And this is the earliest mention of the name Israel found outside of the Bible. The inscription of Merneptah dates to around 1210 BC. The inscription describes who Merneptah and his army fought with in Canaan. The translation reads, Canaan is plundered, Ashkelon is conquered, Gezer is seized, Yanoam is made non-existent, Israel is laid waste. Ashkelon, Gezer, and Yanoam are followed by the city-state symbol. These three city-states were ruled by kings. There is no city-state symbol shown for the name Israel. Instead, the symbol for a foreign people is shown. This means that in 1210 BC, Israel is described as a people that has not yet formed into a nation and therefore is without a king. According to biblical chronology, the date 1210 BC falls in the Judges period, where we find in the book of Judges this repeating phrase, in those days, Israel had no king. So we have here this huge inscription, 10.5 feet high, 5 feet wide, inscribed on both sides. And yet what makes this find so significant is the discovery on it of a single word, the name Israel, found in the Bible over 2,400 times. And this wasn't even the first time that it had been found in an inscription through archaeology, but this was the earliest mention of the name Israel outside of the Bible. This is yet another example of the details in the Bible being verified through the details of an inscription dug up through archaeology. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and you'll want to watch this related video where I travel to Sudan to see another inscription that is the earliest mention of the name of the God of Israel, the name Yahweh.
How cool is that? So here we have people in the world that actually go to these sites. They actually go to these places. They excavate the sites. That's what we're talking about when we talk about primary sources. It's at the place that you're talking about. That's why I brought that up. Go check out his channel. He's got so much cool things. The Moabite stone, that was a really good one. I could go through so much more of the book, but I'm not. I mean, that's literally 3 pages of 3 separate chapters. But what I want to do, because I'm running low on time, is kind of go through why it's pseudo. Why is this book pseudo? And you guys can fact check me. Anybody who wants the critics against our channel, against the Christian movement, against Hebrew Israelites, that's how they do it. Can fact check me. And this is kind of for them what I wanted to present, why it is considered pseudo. So for one, lack of reliable sources and scholarly consensus. That's a big one. The text cites, and these are further along stuff we didn't talk about, but this is stuff in the book. He talks about the Moorish, the medieval Moorish Israelites, I guess, whatever. The text cites Moorish writer like Leo Africanus and Al-Idrisi, who does so selectively and without providing primary sources or verified references. Reliable historical scholarship depends on the use of primary sources and the consensus of experts in the field, which this text lacks, which this book lacks. It just lacks the consensus and peer-reviewed integrity. The claim that there were medieval Hebrew states, so he's claiming medieval Hebrew states like Kamnuria and Lamlam in West Africa is not supported by mainstream historical evidence. Most credible historians do not recognize these states as Jewish kingdoms, and their existence as described in the text is not corroborated by archaeological or textual evidence. Then he has the anachronistic, I gotta say it right. I say anachronistic, but it's anachronistic and insistent claims. The text discusses Jewish influence in West Africa in a way that is inconsistent with established historical timelines and migration patterns. For instance, the idea that entire Jewish kingdoms existed in West Africa and were major players in the trade and politics without leaving substantial records or evidence is highly unlikely. The connection between the fall of the Jewish kingdom of Ghana and the spread of Hebrew tribes throughout Africa is very speculative. The kingdom of Ghana was not a Jewish kingdom, and historical records identify it as an empire influenced by Islamic culture. Yeah. Cultural diffusion and syncretism misrepresented. The text, and then the text I'm talking about is from Babylon and Timbuktu. The book attributes the mixture of paganism, Judaism, and Islam in Senegambia and Guinea to the remnants of Jewish kingdoms. However, this oversimplifies and misrepresents the complex process of cultural diffusion and religious syncretism in West Africa. The historical presence of Jewish communities in North and West Africa, where they did exist, was typically small and did not exert the significant influence implied in the text. The syncretism described is likely a result of broader interactions between indigenous religions and Islam rather than a direct influence of Judaism. So there's that. Over-reliance on secondary and questionable sources. My biggest one. This is just he's oversimplifying and misrepresenting secondary sources. This book heavily relies on interpretations from the 19th century, such as those of Dr. J.L. Wilson, who may not have had access to reliable information or who may have had biases himself that influenced his descriptions. Then he has the pseudo-historical texts often cherry-pick older, less reliable sources to support their claims while ignoring more recent and robust scholarly work that contradicts them. The use of speculative languages and unsubstantiated claims. The book makes sweeping generalizations without proving concrete evidence. For instance, it claims that many of the Hebrew tribes established settlements among the African tribes, but does not provide archaeological or documentary evidence to support it. And we saw that in the videos, the people that are adherents to this book, they're saying, hey, if you want to know, it's right here. And then they just read, and it's been said that they left and went to West Africa. It's been said where? Where's the documentation? It just lacks specificity. It's a hallmark of pseudo-history. And then the last one, modern implications and motives. Pseudo-historical narratives like this one are sometimes used to advance particular ideological or cultural agendas, and we can clearly see that in this work. In this case, the text appears to be attempting to link African history more closely with Jewish history, possibly to construct a narrative of ancient connections that serve contemporary purposes. I think we all know the context of the 70s, right? Who's big in the 70s? Such narratives can distort the true complexities and richness of African history by imposing external identities or by simplifying the relationships between different cultures and religions. So the book exemplifies pseudo-history because it constructs a narrative based on speculative connections, selective use of sources, and anachronistic interpretations. It lacks the rigorous evidence and scholarly consensus required for historical claims and it may be motivated by ideological rather than academic objectives. We all know that's true. But what is he actually taking? This is the fascinating part. What is he actually taking? What's his sources? What is these actual sources? Let me share the sources. The source. Let me check on the chat, see what you guys are doing. Yes, sir. Poorly sourced, abused on secondary sources. He extrapolates beyond the intent of the actual person giving the source. Misrepresents them, doesn't cite anything, even in the age of the modern understanding. He's using old, it could be 19th century stuff, early 19th century stuff, and he's using it in the 21st or 20th century because it was from the 70s. But yeah. Let's see. What is his primary sources? Because I do have one, how he's twisting the sources. And I want to share this with you today before I head out. The method of primary sources. Do we have time for that? I don't think we'll have time for that. So what is he twisting? This is really interesting. In his first one, what is he twisting? We'll just give you... So it's 10 chapters, right? The book is 10 chapters. I'll give you an oversimplified view of what he's doing. So let me share my screen here. So this is broken down by chapter and the misrepresentation and the person or source he's using, right? So if you look, Windsor makes sweeping claims about the origins of black civilizations, asserting that ancient Mesopotamia, including Sumer, Kish, and Babylon, were predominantly black. This is based on selective readings of biblical text. Example, Genesis 10, and linking the term Cush with Ethiopia. However, what's the misrepresentation? The association of Cush with Ethiopia does not imply that all inhabitants of Mesopotamia were black. Scholars like Ephraim Spicer explicitly challenged such broad interpretations, arguing that Cushitic tribes were localized, not dominant across Mesopotamia. And Windsor interprets this in Genesis 2 and other biblical passages outside their linguistic and cultural context, often conflating regions and ethnicities. Chapter 2, the origin of the white race, Windsor discusses the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and posits that the white race emerged from mutations in Japheth's lineage. He cites biblical and pseudo-historical claims to suggest the Japheth's descendants were originally black. His claim of mutations turning black people white lacks genetic evidence and misunderstands how environmental and evolutionary processes operate. Windsor references texts like Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, but adds speculative interpretations unsupported by Josephus's writings. I have it in another paper. We won't get into it, but yeah, he really twists Josephus. Chapter 3, Afro-Asian culture goes to Europe. Windsor claims that European... Hold on. Windsor claims... Oh, I just lost it. He claims that European civilizations borrowed extensively from African and Asian cultures, particularly through Phoenicians and Egyptians. While there is historical merit to cross-cultural influences, he's overgeneralizing. So overgeneralization. He attributes all early European advancements to African civilizations without acknowledging independent European developments. And then there's an inaccurate cultural linkage. The narrative treats black and Hamite interchangeably, creating an oversimplified binary of black versus white colonizations. Shouldn't be doing that, should you? Chapter 4, the original black Jews, Windsor asserts that the Israelites were originally black and identifies biblical figures like Abraham, Moses as black. He draws heavily on biblical descriptions and historical antidotes. So his description of leprosy in Leviticus, turning skin white, are used to argue that the Israelites were black. And we went through the whole entire chapter, and it was about numerous skin diseases. Yes, numerous skin diseases. What was the providence of God and God's wisdom? Keeping his nation healthy, ritualistically, naturally. In the ancient Near East, there's a providence for that. He ignoring that these passages ascribe a disease, not skin color, right? Selective citation. He omits archaeological evidence suggesting that ancient Israelites were ethnically Semitic with a range of physical appearances. Chapter 5, Black Civilization in Africa. This chapter explores African empires like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, emphasizing their cultural achievements, Windsor connects these to the spread of Black Jews. So it's a historical conflation. The narrative merges African Jews communities like the Lemba with broader African civilizations without clear evidence. It's misrepresentation of the scholars. While citing figures like Basil Davidson, Windsor extrapolates their findings to support unsubstantiated claims about Jewish dominance in African history. In chapter 6, the final dispersion of the Black Jews, Windsor argues that Black Jews migrated across Africa after the destruction of the Second Temple. He identifies groups like the Falasha, Ethiopian Jews, as evidence. But it's an historical inaccuracy. The timeline and extent of Jewish migrations are exaggerated. For instance, the claim that Jews founded major African empires lacks archaeological or textual support. He draws on Eldad, the Danites' accounts, but ignores scholarly critiques of their reliability. That's probably dangerous when a pseudo-historian tries to quote another pseudo-historian. What could you come up with? Windsor claims, yes, guys, please hit the like button. Windsor, so chapter 7, the Moorish Empire. We didn't get into that chapter, but Windsor claims the Moors who ruled parts of Spain were predominantly Black Jews. He described their contributions to European culture. So it's an ethnic oversimplification. The Moors were ethnically diverse, including Berbers, Arabs, and others not exclusively Black or Jewish. Right. North African. Overstated influence. While the Moors significantly impacted Spain, Windsor exaggerates their role, suggesting they single-handedly advanced European civilization. Just a broad stroke of a brush. Make that assertion. Chapter 8, the transatlantic slave trade. Windsor connects the transatlantic slave trade to biblical prophecies such as Deuteronomy 28. That's why I say they're speaking the same language when he's standing in front of IUIC, even though he himself is probably not a one-Wester. This is where they all connect. Transatlantic slave, biblical prophecies, Deuteronomy 28. You know where they're coming from. He argues that enslaved Africans were primarily Black Jews. Theological distortion. His interpretation of Deuteronomy 28 is widely critiqued as anachronistic and not applicable to African history. And the assertion that most enslaved Africans were Jews lacks documentary evidence and conflates African ethnic identities. Chapter 9, the Black Jews in Americas. Windsor extends his claim to African descent in the Americas, suggesting they are the lost tribes of Israel. So it's a speculative, and I think that's what Hebrew Israelites have now, is a speculative associations. He links cultural practices of African American to ancient Israel without credible evidence. And there's a over-reliance on anecdotal sources. Many of Windsor's claims are based on oral traditions or pseudo-historical texts rather than verified historical records. Finally, the last chapter, chapter 10, the Black Diaspora. Windsor concludes by celebrating the resilience of Black Jews worldwide. He portrays them as the true heirs of Israelite heritage. It's a selective glorification. While highlighting Black contributions, he omits complexities like the diversity of African diasporic experiences and identities, and the lack of scholarly consensus. Many of his conclusions are unsupported by mainstream archaeology, genetics, or history. So, what have we revealed of From Babylon to Timbuktu? He has a pattern. It's a constant pattern throughout the book of the selective use of evidence. Biblical texts and historical anecdotes are often interpreted in ways that fit his narrative while ignoring contrary evidence. Conflation and generalization, ethnic, cultural, and religious groups are homogenized into a monolithic Black identity. Pseudo-history. Claims are frequently based on speculative interpretations rather than rigorous historical archaeological research. So that's why we deem the book heretical. You know, it's very interesting book when, it's kind of a, I don't want to be disrespectful to him, but it's kind of an amateur read. because the way it's worded is kind of interesting. You know, we know that this has happened, so therefore we can say this. It's like that's that all the time in the book. You're like, wait, how do we know that? And then how can we come to that conclusion where an actual scholarly source, a book that's actually dealing with the issues, says, we know that due to so-and-so, quoting so-and-so who excavated the site, blah, 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 we can conclude through a peer-reviewed consensus that we can determine that. It's just he doesn't do any of that stuff. He just goes, well, we know that the Gishon and the Euphrates River sat along Africa, so therefore all the Jews were black. It's like he makes those kind of assertions. It's like, wow, I mean, really, can you do that? Can you do that? I'm having camera problems. I don't know what's going on with my camera. There we go. I gotta move my camera. Anyway, I did not know I'd go that long. Praise be to God. And it's not the end of the world for Hebrew Israelites because they know they don't. It's not a big issue for them to dismiss this book. It's really not. You know, they would easily throw this book in the garbage if they knew it's going to mess up their. Why am I sinking? Do you see me sinking? Well, looks like my camera needs to be. I need to be reevaluated. Yeah, it needs to be reevaluated. But anyway, I'm logging out. My camera's melting. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, watch it. Anyway, shout out to everybody for coming out, checking me out. This was a spur of the moment thing. I have been working on this. I wanted to get it out there because there's other things I want to be working on. A shout out to Stevie Rankins. Shout out to Post Tenor Brass Lux 1647. Mom, Raven Lynn. In Context with Jim Green. DWC. Nate 2D2. And yes, thank you for sticking around. I will this Wednesday coming up, we are talking about Rahab's rescue. It's going to be very good. We're going to continue our woman series of the Bible. So grace and peace to all, and to all a good night.